today. Like StreamYard is not our friend. Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and I'm here today with my friend Jennifer Haigh to talk about her new book, Rabbit Moon. Welcome, Jennifer. Welcome back to The Blaze.
Thank you, Jenna.
You're welcome. Jennifer's on her phone today. We had to get ingenious with StreamYard. So we're going to be like different sizes, messing with you. If you think you've taken some sort of hallucinogenic, you haven't. You can, but you haven't. We are so excited to have Jennifer here. First, a couple words about The Blaze. For those of you who haven't joined us before, welcome. We are a team of 30-ish creative professional volunteers. We started linking authors and their readers during the age of COVID when nobody could leave the house. And obviously, we are well beyond that now. But we have continued our tradition of bringing you your favorite authors in your living room without anybody having to put on pants. If you like what you see here, please give us a like or a follow on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, which I refuse to call X. We are ubiquitous. Please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.mightyblaze.com so you never have literary FOMO ever again. No more FOMO. Nobody likes that. And now that my commercial is over, I'm going to introduce our guest. Are you ready for your bio?
I am.
Okay, buckle up. It's here. Jennifer Haigh is the author of 8 best-selling, critically acclaimed novels. Her first, Mrs. Kimball, won the PEN Hemingway Award for debut fiction. Her 7th novel, Mercy Street, was named the Best Book of 2022 by The New Yorker and won the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award. That was so inspiring to see. Her short stories have been published widely in The Atlantic, Granta, The Best American Short Stories, many other places, published in 18 languages. Her work has been recognized by the Guggenheim, the Michener Foundation, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She lives in Boston with her husband, Josh. And she's here today to talk about her 8th novel, Rabbit Moon, which dropped April 1st of this year. So still brand new Rabbit. And I always thought April 1st was such a fortuitous day to publish a book. My first book came out on April 1st, and I was like, why April Fools? And then I realized that was kind of perfect for our profession. So how have things been going since Rabbit Moon came out?
Oh, it's good. It's always a little unsettling when a book that nobody has read becomes a subject of conversation. So it's like people have met my imaginary friends. It's very unsettling. It's like someone has eavesdropped on my dreams.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it. You must be a best-selling writer or something. I love that. It is sort of disconcerting because there's a time lag too, right? Like we're sitting in our rooms most of the time, always wearing our black turtlenecks, of
At all.
course, at
Yes.
all times, because that's what you have to do to be a writer.
Yeah.
We sit and commune with our imaginary people, and then suddenly, a year and a half later, they jump from your head to the page, and people are talking about them like we all know them. It's so weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little, but miraculous. So, introduce for us, if you will, Rabbit Moon. Like, tell us in your own words what the novel is about.
Okay. So Rabbit Moon it's a novel I sort of backed into writing. It was not something I planned to write. It's one of those happy accidents that occasionally happens in a writer's life. So a few years ago, several years ago, 2016 to be exact, I had a fellowship to travel to China for the first time.
Okay.
And at that time, I was working on an earlier novel, Mercy Street, set in Boston, where I live. And so when I got this fellowship to go to Shanghai for 3 months, I thought, okay, I'll just continue working on this book I've started. And once I got there, I discovered immediately this was not going to be possible because after many years in Boston, I could not even remember what this city looked like. Shanghai was so overwhelming in the best way uh,
Mm.
that it was really hard for me to imagine myself somewhere else. And in fact, I didn't want to. I wanted
Mm.
to be where I was. So I started writing a story set there. Rabbit Moon is a story about a fractured American family, a family that has gone completely off the rails. And the novel opens with a hit and run accident. So this is not a spoiler. It literally happens in the first 2 pages. A young 22-year-old American woman is hit by a car early on a Sunday morning in the financial district of Shanghai. And the story proceeds from there. So the reason the story begins with an accident, I'm not much of an autobiographical writer, but in this case, This is this is completely an obsession of mine. So in the time I was in Shanghai, I was fixated on my fear of being hit by a car. It's a city of really intense traffic, and for a Bostonian to say that, that is something. The traffic in Shanghai was like nothing I had ever experienced. And on a nearly daily basis, I would see a fender bender or a bike accident or someone actually hit a pedestrian. And I started to obsess about that. Like, well, God, what would happen if I got hit by a car? Well, I guess they would what, go through the American consulate, and they'd have to track down my family, and I don't know, maybe my family would come here, and so that's what happens. That is where the story begins. This young woman is hit by a car. Her parents are notified, and they do what any parent would do. They get on a plane and come to Shanghai. It's complicated by the fact that her parents are divorced and hate each other and have not been in the same room since they split. So here they are in this uh, really unexpected, traumatic situation of their daughters in the hospital, and they're forced to deal with each other. So that is where the story begins.
And the young woman, Lindsay, who is in the hospital, also has a younger sister, Grace.
Yes, and Grace is very important to the story. She is 11 years younger than Lindsay and was adopted as an infant from an orphanage in China. So back then, 11 years earlier, Lindsay traveled to China with their mother to pick up the baby from this orphanage. And this began Lindsay's lifelong fascination with China, and in particular, the Chinese language. So that's an important fact in the story. And although Grace, the little sister, is not on stage at first, she's really essential to the story because she is the closest person to Lindsay, who's estranged from their parents. This much younger sister is the one member of the family that she feels close to and stays in touch with. And yeah, yeah.
So you started with, I guess, is it fair to say that you started with the accident itself and then built the story out from there? Or did you have some idea of what the family sort of psychological DNA would be going into it? Like, did you start with the fractured family and then marry it to the accident? Or did you start with the accident and everything grew out of that crash?
It's the accident. I started with that. I really started with the place. I loved being in this city. I was overwhelmed by this city, and I couldn't hold anything else in my head. So if I was going to write in those months, I was going to write something set in Shanghai. My experience there was limited and shaped by the fact that I don't speak Chinese. And so this is the first time I had ever traveled internationally with no grasp of the language. I speak French. I can fake my way through a few European languages. I'm pretty good at languages, but the Chinese language defeated me completely. So in this time I was there, I was lonelier than I had ever been in my life. And it changed the way I wrote. For the first time in my life, I was writing in public spaces. And that's not something I ever thought I would be able to do. I am not the sort of writer who can sit in a cafe with a latte and scribble pages. That's never been possible for me. But in China, I was able to do that because there was no danger of me eavesdropping. The language was so impenetrable to me that I could be completely in my story, have my own language in my head, and still be out in the world around people, observing people. And I think in some way it made me less lonely to be surrounded by life, even if I couldn't participate in it or communicate with anybody. I wasn't sitting alone in my room.
That is really fascinating. I also am a writer who cannot write in cafes because I'm too easily distracted and eavesdrop and write other people's conversations into what I'm writing. And then I'm like, well, what if I have to go to the bathroom and, squirrel? And, that's true. I imagine this sensation of being immersed in a country whose language you don't speak. Was it like a dream in some ways? Did it feel like a 3-month dream?
No, that's not the word I would use. I mean, it felt very real. It felt very palpable. Um, I can't say I fell in love with Shanghai, but I was captivated by it. It's quite different. When I travel, I often fantasize about living in that place to the point of like looking at real estate ads, looking at apartments, and a couple times I've come very close to actually taking the plunge and doing that. I was never tempted to do that in
Mhm.
Shanghai. It was not that pleasant. It was complicated. It was challenging. It was fascinating, but not pleasant exactly. Um, Part of what was shocking about it is that an Asian megacity is a very congested place.
Mhm.
And even if you're an urban person and used to living in a city, nothing quite prepares you for that. Shanghai is a city of 30 million people. And compared to Shanghai, New York feels like a quiet backwater, you know. So everything moves
Imagine.
at this accelerated pace, and the environment is very present. You cannot insulate yourself from it in any way. So that certainly had an impact on me, and Shanghai is all through the book. I mean, this really, you can tell that it was written in public places because so much of it is what was happening around me.
That is amazing. I love this because then we can participate directly and viscerally in the experience you had. And you knocked out one of my questions, which was, how did you write this city so vividly? How did you capture the city as a character? And I thought you must have gone, which you did. One of our readers asked in the chat, why did you go to Shanghai? And it's a great question. I know you got a fellowship, but I usually aspire to go to places that I already know that I'm going to write about. And it sounds as though you had that sort of Hemingway, like when I was in Michigan, I could write about Paris. When I was in Paris, I could write about Michigan, like no actual intent of writing about Shanghai. And then it kind of bulldozed its way into your writer brain.
That's exactly how it was. What happened was a couple years before, I had been on a residency in Denmark. It was a residency for international writers and translators. And I met a Chinese writer there who was born and raised in Shanghai and told me about this fellowship. And so it was something I pursued without really thinking I would get it and having no idea when I would get it. So that it came along when I was just getting my feet under me in another novel was in a way bad timing, and in
Mm-hmm.
another way a great gift. So what happened was is soon after I got there, I put aside Mercy Street and embarked on this other story and wrote hard on it for the entire time I was there. I wrote a lot very quickly, which is not usual for me. And then I came back at the end of the fellowship and returned to working on Mercy Street, not at all convinced I would ever come back to Rabbit Moon, which wasn't even called that yet. I had all these pages. I was really in love with what I was writing, but I felt the need to finish that other book I had started. So I did that. And as always with a novel, it took far longer than I thought possible. So years passed, and these pages of Rabbit Moon were sitting in a drawer. And I must have been around 2022, I guess, when I finally went back to it. So I had put it down for 5 years. And I'd never done that before. I'd never gone back to something that I'd written some years before and have it still feel alive. I
Mm-hmm.
was I wasn't at all convinced that it would still feel alive, but it did. And magically, having been away from it for so long, I could see exactly what I wanted to do with it. You know, I had a teacher in grad school, Ethan Kanan, who used to say that if we all had 20 years to write a novel, nobody would need an editor. And I think that's true because there's nothing like time and distance. You know, it gives you this kind of perspective you cannot get any other way. So when I came back to those pages in 2021 or 22, I can't remember now, I had a kind of clarity about the story that I hadn't had before.
It's like the eagle eye view that you get, that you can telescope up over the book and look down and say, oh, this, that, the other, that you earn through time, since we can't fly. And by the way, I love Ethan Kanan. Like my grad school experience was suffused with Ethan Kanan, Russell Banks era. You know, that's all the guys I loved. And I think that is great advice. When you went back to it, did you have the unusual and happy feeling of thinking, this is really good? Like some of it, I know you said it felt alive and it's viable, but did you also have the feeling of like, I don't know why I ever did that, but also I don't even know how I knew that at the time? That's kind of magic.
You know, it was so strange. I could almost read it as though somebody else had written it. And that's not something I've ever been able to do before. And I think it was very helpful. It's why the holes were very clear to me. I could see what was missing. I could see, you know, what it needed. That hadn't at all been obvious to me at the time I was writing the pages.
Mm.
But because so many years had elapsed, and because I was in such a different place geographically, I just had a different lens on it than I've ever had on my own work. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think we should probably all go away somewhere and get kind of hijacked by a place and then put the book away for 5 years. And this is now a thing. Renee had asked, Renee is winning our question round today, but people ask your questions in the chat. She wants to know what the original title was. And that is such a good question. I love it.
Oh, I had several different titles for this book, and they were all wrong, and that's fairly typical for me. Um, at one point, it was called Consequence,
Oh, consequence.
which I like in some ways because it goes to the heart of what the book is about, but it's
Mhm,
also very abstract. So even at the time, I knew it wasn't a good title. It was just sort of what I named the file.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so it took me. I had to finish the book before I could name it, and that is often how it works for me.
mhm,
It's it's like having a baby and not naming the baby until you've met the baby.
mhm,
So it was sort of like that. I had to write the whole thing first, and then it became Rabbit Moon.
mhm. You also had a different cover, and we're gonna do like write or dish here, people. I have the beautiful arc, but I like the cover that you was put on it better, the jacket cover that it has now. If you wouldn't mind holding it up, like
Yeah.
how
So
different this is, you guys. It's so different.
this is what the book looks like now,
It's beautiful.
finished product. So the galley that Jenna has, that was an earlier attempt at a cover, and I actually quite liked it. It felt like a strange choice for the book, but it really grew on me. What I found really bizarre about that cover is that that is exactly what the Lindsay character looks like in
I'll
my.
hold it up again. So if you guys have had the pleasure of reading Rabbit Moon, Lindsay is the young woman who has the accident. She's kind of the book around whom everything happened, or the character around whom everything happens.
Hmm.
I agree. I saw this and I was like, they got her so right. And it's a beautiful cover. And then they changed the cover, and that cover is also beautiful. So I felt like you were spoiled for choice with the covers. Do you think?
It's true. It's true in a way. The thing that's odd about that is that was a pre-existing painting. It wasn't something that was designed for this book. The designer came across that painting, which already existed in the world. It was the product of somebody else's imagination, and looks just like Lindsay does in my mind. So I found that really eerie and kind of intriguing, but it never felt quite right for the book because the book isn't just about Lindsay. It's about the family and the sort of ruptured relationships in the family. So this cover for the book feels more correct. It's also
Mm-hmm.
very beautiful. Um, but yeah, it's that process of finding a cover. I mean, if you even to find one you like is highly unlikely, and to come across two, that is an embarrassment of riches.
It is. I was just talking about that in the green room with our producer, Karen, who is also a writer and a bookseller. And I have a book coming out soon, and my next step is to see the cover art, and it will be illustrated, which is not a thing for me. And of course, I had made a cover that I sent to the art department to get their, whatever. But it's so rare that you get a cover that exactly matches your imagination. And I think the Rabbit Moon cover that you ended up with is so atmospheric and so it's very poignant. It's not quite sad, but I feel it is very poignant. So I hope that you love it. Like I hope every time you see it, you just think, "Oh, that's the right one."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I feel that.
yeah. We have a lot of authors on our chat today too, so I wanted to ask like how much say you get in your covers because all of us are sitting here like, I wish I had a lot of control over. I think we all want to design our covers because most of us are visual people. Like, do you usually have an idea of what the cover will look like before you turn the book in?
Sure.
You
No,
know?
no, I don't have that skill set at all. So I don't at all have, fantasies of designing my own cover. That would never even occur to me. And it's why I'm not very much help. So I always have a say in the cover in that I can say yes or no, but I can't do much more than that because I can't say this is wrong, try this instead, because I really just I don't have that skill set. My mind does not work that way. So I'm impressed that yours does, and that you actually came up with a sketch for your cover. That is completely beyond me.
Yeah, it's terrifying. But I think that you are every editor's dream and every art department's dream because you're not like, well, funny, you should ask. I actually have 18 ideas about my cover, and you should use every single one of them because it's my imagination.
Oh, I don't know. I think often that would be welcome, because I'm sort of the opposite extreme where I have absolutely nothing to offer except yes or no. And that is really not very helpful.
I don't know. Well, we'll see. I'll ask my editor. I'm sure like when I have these cover art discussions with her, we go several rounds and then my agent has to step in and say, "You're done now. This is your cover. Step away from the cover discussion." So, yeah, I love this. Thank you for telling me that. This is one of the reasons I love, love, love this show so much because I get to talk to other authors and we're all the same in many ways and we are all completely different in other ways. And I find this endlessly fascinating. So, you're so it's so clarifying to hear you say that this cover that you have is the correct one because even though Lindsay is the character, she's like the maypole because she is the character around whom all the other characters gather. But the book isn't just about her, it's about how the family copes after her accident. And can you tell us a little bit about the challenges and joys of writing in multiple points of view? Because her dad, Aaron, gets a point of view, her mom, Claire, gets a point of view. Remember, those two are divorced, so that's fun and dealing with navigating Shanghai and a daughter who is in a coma. And then there's Lindsay, and then there's Grace. Like, what was the best part? What was the worst part of this rotation?
That's always very natural to me to work in multiple points of view. I almost always do it. And in fact, the one book where I didn't was so hard to write. I've written only one novel in first person, and I found that far more difficult because what I find generally is that no one character knows all the good parts of the story.
Oh, interesting.
And so when I'm writing in multiple points of view, I I like seeing through a character's eyes the differences in the way the same event is remembered. It's kind of like if you have adult siblings and you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table, there's no one episode from your childhood that everybody remembers in the same way.
Mhm.
And it's always like that with multiple points of view. It's that Kurosawa film Rashomon, where it's the gulf between um, different characters' perceptions and different characters' memories.
Mhm.
Um, for me, writing a novel, it always begins with the moment after which nothing will ever be the same. And so in the case of Rabbit Moon, it's very obvious what that moment is, right? It's this hit and run accident that happens on page two. Um, but there is also an event in the past after which nothing has been the same.
Yep.
So so there's sort of there are two things going on in this novel. There's the present story of Lindsay's accident and the fallout from her accident. And then there is this episode in the past, which was really the catalyst for the disintegration of this family. It's where everything went off the rails. And so as the story unfolds, you find out more about that in all the different characters' points of view and the sort of conflicting view of what went wrong and whose fault it was and who is responsible for the things that went wrong.
Yeah, there's kind of a double fracture, and I wanted to ask how that unfolded for you as the writer. But we have some great questions in the chat about points of view that I wanted to bring up. You guys are bringing it with the questions today. I love it. So Denise wanted to know who is your favorite character to write, and I had the same question.
It's so hard because whoever I'm writing at the moment is my favorite. Now the book is it's true, because you kind of that's what writing in point of view is. It's a loyalty exercise. And so whatever character's point of view I'm writing in, I take that person's side in all the family conflicts. When I'm writing Aaron, I'm on Aaron's side, and I remember it the way Aaron remembers it. And when I'm on writing Claire, I'm on Claire's side. But once I'd finished writing the book and took a step back, I would have to say my favorite character was Grace, the younger sister. And I think it's simply because I wrote her from early childhood. And that always happens to me. I developed this strange tenderness for the characters I knew as children. And in the course of the novel, you get to see Grace grow up. So she's 11 years old when the book opens, and then you get to see her later as an adult. And even writing adult Grace, it was so clear to me. It was so obvious, the child within the grown woman. It's sort of the way you feel about your siblings, that somebody you shared your childhood with. I have a little bit that feeling about Grace, so I'd have to choose her.
Mhm. And who is the hardest character to write? Denise wants to know the follow-up question.
You know what? There is no, I would say no character was harder than any other. Because they're all me in some way. None of them has a thought that I've never had. It just doesn't work that way. So I did not find any one character easier or more difficult. They were all, I would say, comparable in terms of difficulty.
Interesting, because I always think, I mean, we have an ongoing conversation among some of the writers I know who are in my workshop about the difficulty of writing from other genders' points of view or other cultural points of view, or and I'm always struck by women who write men well and men who write women well, and you can always tell when somebody doesn't do it well. It's like somebody who is like trying to be in drag and they're just not doing a very good job. You're like, just don't do that. Just like stick to your own, your own skill set. But I thought Aaron was so convincing. I really liked Aaron. You know how readers will have like fan favorites? I liked all of them. And then whenever he came in, there was just a special little like if it were his point of view in a series, I'd be like, get my popcorn for this one. He's going to say something a little off and I'm going to be happy for it. I was wondering about, like, obviously from what you're saying, I'm going to guess it wasn't hard to write, Aaron, that it was easy to step into a guy's perspective, skin, experience. What do you think about, do you love doing this?
I love men. I just really enjoy men, understand men, and I enjoy them. And so I've always written a lot from a male point of view. I think because, I was a daddy's girl. I was really close to my dad, super close to my brother. So I've never found that to be a stretch at all. And I think fundamentally, people who write the opposite sex badly, it's because they assume they're more different from you than they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this cheesy book from the, I guess, was it late 80s or 90s? Men are from
Men are
Mars.
from Mars, women are from
Venus.
Venus. Yep.
That's such bullshit. We're all from Earth.
Mhm.
And like, I don't accept that men and women are different species. I don't believe that at all. And I think if you approach it with that assumption, then you're going to do it really badly.
Mhm. People are people. I
Yeah.
think also that when I'm writing characters, I think of each one being an assemblage of like a constellation of traits and thoughts and interests and desires and history and that Anne Frank little bundle of contradictions. And so to think of them as needing to belong to a certain kind of subspecies of behavior seems insulting to me, to the character. So I'm like, who are you as a person? And then we'll see how you intersect with your gender or your history. Or I love writing men, honestly. Like they're my favorites. The book I just finished has this serial as a male point of view. And I cackled every day when I sat down to write it. And I gave it to my friend who said that women can't write men. And he was like, I don't know how you did this. I'm like, because we know you, we see you, like we know what you're doing, we know what you're thinking. So like to say, I love men, I'm going to put that on a t-shirt for you. I think that's so great. So true. Renee wanted to know too, did you write each point of view separately and braid them together, or did you write chronologically?
It's so hard to remember now. It's really hard to remember in what order I wrote anything. What happens to me once a book is in the rearview mirror, and Jen, I wonder if this happens to you too. I don't even feel like I made it up. Like, of course, it's ridiculous. I made it all up. Like, none of these people is based on anybody I know. I made it all up. But once it's a few years behind me, I don't remember making it up. I feel like I just wrote down what happened. And
Mm.
it's like an elaborate form of mental illness in a way, because I think about my past novels and I feel like those are all people I know and experiences I've had and things I remember. And none of it happened. I made it all up.
But don't you think so? I am like you in a way and not like you in a way, in that I remember where I was when I wrote certain scenes, like certain lines, like they get kind of embroidered on me in a way that stamps me with the process. So I'm aware of I remember what the process was, and I get very wedded. Like if you pointed to something in a book, I would tell you how many takes it took, why I chose that punctuation mark, blah blah blah.
Wow.
But I
I
do often confuse whether something happened or not. Like I'm like, of course this happened in real life, and then I'm like, oh wait, no, you made that up. Like I can't, like that line gets blurred. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Anyway, continue.
No, that's it. That's all I got.
Uh,
Like I totally cut you off, and the interview is your interview. But I do think like sometimes I look back at my life and I think that the things that were in my books actually happened to me, and then I have to kind of go back and sort through. Like you're at a garage sale or something, like the real from the not real. Does that happen to you ever?
yeah, sort of. Yeah.
You're like, no, you're a lunatic. Also, guys, I kind of want to highlight what Jennifer said earlier about starting the moment after things will never be the same in a book. I feel like we're getting like a master class on like how to write a novel because that's such a great suggestion. I really love that. So, do you start all your novels that way? Like, do you have intent when you sit down and say, I just need to find that moment for X situation? Like, how do they grow? Because I feel like this book is like origami. Like, it kind of grew organically out of like, there's a girl in a bed who had a car accident, then there's a family, then there's a family fracture, then there's the past fracture that led to the current fracture. Is that accurate? And if
Yeah.
so, is that kind of
Yeah.
normal for your process?
Every book is different, and this book is maybe a little more different than the rest because there's kind of a way I approach it normally. Um, Typically, before I sit down to write chapter one, I've written about the book for some months, maybe 3 to 6 months, where I'm writing about the characters, I'm writing about the landscapes. And so I'm not trying to write actual pages that will appear in the book. I'm just writing for myself to get to know who the characters are. And in this case, I didn't have time to do that. I had this finite block of time in Shanghai, and I wanted I wanted to use it. I wrote a lot very quickly, much faster than I normally would, and I did no preparation. It was all just flying by the seat of my pants. So this is sort of an outlier for me compared to any other book I've written, which is I'm a little bit more methodical normally. But this was a different thing. And a lot of it I just discovered in the process of writing, sitting in tea houses, sitting in public parks and train stations and restaurants and watching the people around me. One of the great things about travel for me as a writer is that it gives you fresh eyes. And it's really hard to get that when you're writing about a familiar place and familiar people. But when you're in a part of the world where nothing is familiar and everything astonishes you, you notice in a way that's hard to replicate when you're back in your familiar surroundings. So that was one of the advantages of writing in a place where everything was so unfamiliar.
Mhm. In a way, historical fiction is a little bit like that because you have to go back into a time when very little is familiar. But I think this sounds more like an immersion experience. One of my friends, who is Jennifer Rosner, who is a fantastic writer, is working on a novel right now. Hopefully, I'm not talking out of school about it, in which one of the main characters is deaf. And what you're describing reminds me a little bit of that, how the character became so attuned to the play of light on the floor and would know when the dog needed to go out, or she could tell from like the way her mother was moving in a certain way, whether she had back pain or not. Like you just have to become attuned to things in a different way if you don't know the language, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly true. And I lived the time I was in Shanghai, I lived in this apartment building that was really interesting to me. And it is the model for Lindsay's apartment building in the novel. Like many buildings in China, it was sort of multi-use. So on every floor of this apartment tower, there were businesses. There were a few apartments, and there might be a nail salon or an acupuncture clinic or a dance studio. And I lived on a high floor of this building, 2 doors down from a hair salon. And that hair salon um, found its way into the novel. It's where the character Johnny Do works. And in fact, Johnny himself was suggested by a person I saw every single day in the building. I saw him in the elevator. I saw him outside smoking cigarettes. He was a very beautiful young man who worked as a hairstylist in the salon.
Yes.
And had the same thing happened here at home, I would have contrived some way to have a conversation with him to find out who he was. But there was no way I could possibly do that, not speaking the language. So in a way, it was very freeing. Um, it forced me to write purely from imagination and not rely on research, which would be my default setting. If I had the possibility of doing research, I would do that, but I couldn't. So I imagined an entire life for this stranger, and I will never know whether my invention comes anywhere close to the reality. Who knows? But it was very much suggested by this stranger I saw every day.
I loved that character. And Denise said in the chat, it must have freed your mind to wonder. And I think that sounds wonder or wander. I don't have my glasses on now. Wonder. Okay. Either is good. Wonder or wonder. Thank you, Karen, for putting that back up. I wonder if the book is going to be translated into Chinese.
Not there's no plan for that right now.
But you never know. It could happen. And then you can go back to the hair salon and present it to Johnny Do and say, look, you're in my book. Or not. I wonder where he is now. So go ahead.
Well, that's the thing. One of the things that I found so striking about Shanghai and what it to me made it different from any other place I'd ever spent time was the rate of change.
Mm,
Even while I was there, I saw so much construction, and in China, construction project happens really fast. In Boston, it takes us 6 months to fill a pothole. And in China, you can build a whole city in 6 months. And so the entire time I was there, I kept seeing buildings being torn down. Buildings that looked new to me were being torn down and replaced with newer buildings so that you could almost see the skyline remodeling itself before your eyes. And even at the time, I thought, if I come back here in a year, I won't recognize anything.
mm.
Sure, that's true. And now here we are 9 years on. I don't know that I could even find the street I lived on because the rate of change is so, it's change on steroids. It's really remarkable.
How interesting and how disconcerting. I could turn this whole thing into a conversation about China and Shanghai. What was the weirdest thing you ate? And what was the best thing you ate?
I don't even know the weirdest thing I ate because I often didn't know what I was eating. And that is the reality of not speaking the language. And I love street food and I'm adventurous and I'll try anything really. So I often had no idea what I was eating. Um, I have to say, eating in Shanghai, you're very aware that this is like a 6,000-year-old cuisine. Like there is a complexity and delicacy that it is quite an eating experience. One of the great things we did on this fellowship was go to dinners. We had no real obligations, but we got invited to a lot of dinners. And I still remember sitting at round tables and having this endless series of small dishes come out, and each one of them was so so delicate and so particular and such a striking palette of flavors, and they kept coming and coming and coming. So I ate marvelously, and I don't know what I ate.
I love that. Um, yeah, I love that. It's like dim sum when I used to just go and point at things in carts and enjoy it completely and go home. I did feel like it was kind of like a marvelous dream. So this being your eighth book, which is just amazing and makes me feel like such a slacker. I've loved all the books since Mrs. Kimball. My mom and I would have book clubs of two as like Jennifer Haigh fangirls. Like long before I knew you, my mom was like, you have to read this book, Mrs. Kimball. So we read it. We discussed it. We discussed the bad men. And then she also loved Baker's Towers, about the Pennsylvania mill town or the mining town that you sometimes return to ish, also in Heat and Light. And I thought Heat and Light should have been a Pulitzer winner because I just thought it was such a remarkable exploration of fracking from a narrative point of view and made it so accessible. Like looking back from Rabbit Moon to Mrs. Kimball, like, can you describe for us like who you were when you wrote Mrs. Kimball? Like, where were you? What were you wearing? What were you thinking? Like, what was your ambition as that writer, as the Mrs. Kimball writer?
Well, clearly I was wearing a black turtleneck because the
Yeah, right.
like
Duh.
um I wrote Mrs. Kimball in part while I was a student at the Iowa Writers Workshop. So I had started it before I began grad school, and I finished it while I was in the program. So that is really, it was the first novel I ever finished was Mrs. Kimball. I'd had two sort of miscarriages before that, two attempts at a novel that went maybe 3-4 months each. And then I realized very quickly that this isn't going to work. This is not viable. So Mrs. Kimball was the first one I ever finished. And at that point, had only ever been a short story writer.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it was my first attempt, and I wrote much of it in Iowa City, Iowa, on my back porch. It was a
Mm.
wonderful place to write. Um, so yeah, that's who I was then.
Did you have like this panting, burning desire to be published and take over the literary world, or am I just projecting?
I don't know. I think I just wanted to write a book I wanted to read. And it has remained like that for me, especially in the early stages of a novel. That's all I really think about. Like, if I were reading this book, what would I want to have happen? What would I want to know about these characters? What is the scene I would want to see? And that's the North Star for me. That's as close as I have to um, sort of a process, I guess. It's just in the first draft trying to write a book that I would want to read. And that has not changed at all. That's what I was doing with Mrs. Kimball, and that's what I did with Rabbit Moon.
I love that. So, do you like between books when you're kind of test driving ideas? Are you ever between books, or do you almost always have something cooking? Let's start there.
Yeah, I'm often between books. But really it depends on how the publishing process works out, because sometimes you deliver a book and it's on shelves pretty quickly. Other times it's 2 years elapse. And so you really do need to get started on something else. You can't just wait for the book to come out. So it depends on the publishing schedule. In the case of Rabbit Moon, it's been done for a little while, so I have started another novel, and I'm well into something else now. And I feel better when I'm working. I like to have something going. Although when a book comes out, you kind of have to put it down and go out and promote the book that has been published, and sort of put it aside for later.
Do you get cognitive dissonance from that? Like going from the desk with your black turtleneck to going out on tour with your black
Which I
turtleneck?
like.
It's like
Um,
for a different book.
Um, it is a very different process. It's promoting a book is like the opposite of writing,
Yeah.
honestly. And so initially it's always a little jarring to go from being a hermit sitting alone in a room with my imaginary friends for 3 or 4 years to coming on a mighty blaze. So there's a moment of adjustment, I think, but I do enjoy meeting writers. Or meeting readers and fellow writers. It's fun, and it's so much easier than writing. Actually, like everything is easier than writing for me. And by comparison, promoting a book is nothing. It's not hard at all.
This surprises me so much, though, because you're one of the writers I admire as seeming like you are always writing. So either you're putting on an excellent show of always seeming to write something that you like, or you're actually doing that.
Well, if I'm not, if I'm home and able to be writing, I prefer to be.
Mhm.
That's my natural state.
Mhm.
I that like spending most of your life sitting alone in a room. That's not everybody's dream, but it is my dream. And so that is when my life makes perfect sense. Is when I'm in a steady work rhythm, and um, so yeah, if I'm unless I am as I am now traveling around, doing events in bookstores and that kind of thing. Yeah, I do like to be writing.
Yeah, that's super fun. I feel like that's true. There are those two speeds, and I am the same way. Like, I despise starting a book. I hate it. Unless I have an idea I love, and even then I need to back into it like one of those trucks that beeps when it backs up, and there's lots of bitching and moaning, which the dog hears. And then once I'm into it, the magic stage when it's cooking all the time and you wake up in the night and dictate notes to yourself and you get up and you're doing something random and you think, oh no, that line should have been this. Like, that kind of muttering to oneself stage is my favorite. And then also meeting readers is my favorite. So I like those two speeds of the writing life, and all the other ones I find to be somewhat onerous. But luckily we have these rewards. So, and you're actively out on tour now. Tell us a little bit about your upcoming events, and then I will let other people ask questions for a change.
Okay. So I have done events in Boston and New York so far. I'm heading to Washington, D.C. this weekend, and then to Philadelphia, to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is near my undergraduate institution, Dickinson College, which will be lovely. I'm going to Nashville to Ann Patchett's bookstore, Parnassus,
Whoa.
and I'm going to the Unbound Festival in Columbia, Missouri, where you have also been. I'm going to the LA Times Book Festival, and then driving around and doing some events here in New England, in Portland, Maine, and Hartford, and Manchester, Vermont, and Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. So that is about the size of it.
That's a good size. I hope you're going to be back kind of sitting and hanging out and writing this summer, and we can just get iced coffees and write together in our black turtleneck, sleeveless black turtlenecks, because it will be summer. But it's a great time to be touring. A big shout out to the Unbound Festival in Columbia, Missouri, which I love, kind of centered around Skylark Books, which I also love. So excellent. Ellen says, I saw Jennifer many moons ago. We see what you did there, Ellen, in Rochester, New York at an arts and lectures event, and she read From Faith. Hers was the only reading that totally enthralled me. So there is some rocket fuel for you from our debut Spotlight on-air host. Thank you, Ellen. That was great. Yes. And okay, let's find some questions from our audience. So you guys have been waiting very patiently while I've been fangirling and asking all the author questions. Renee asks, what genre of books do you prefer to read, and what are you currently reading?
So I read the sort of thing I write, I suppose. I read literary fiction. In general, I prefer contemporary stories. I don't read a lot of historical fiction. The last great thing I read was, I think it was a second novel by the British writer Meg Mason called Sorrow and Bliss. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
absolute knockout. I don't want to say too much about it except just read it. It's a contemporary story. It's a first person narrator, a young woman, and it's laugh out loud funny and also kind of breaks your heart. It's really wonderful. So that's kind of the last thing that delighted me.
I love that. Thank you for that recommendation. And I think we have time for maybe one more question, Karen, if you want to pop on it. Ellen. Hi, Ellen. We see you again. When you write about the book, do those pages show up in the finished novel or just inform your writing? That is a great question.
Yeah, mostly they don't show up in the book. Occasionally, I happen upon something and I'll write a scene that makes its way into the book, but most of it doesn't. In order to write truly about these characters, I have to know who they are. It's kind of like the way I know my brother. I grew up with a brother who's a year older. We were very close, and I know him so deeply that I can predict with pretty good accuracy what he would say or do in any situation. And I want to know my characters that deeply. So that whole pre-writing process that I go through, that's how I get to know who they are. So I write about their childhoods, and I write about their first love and first summer job and heartbreak, and all these formative experiences that make us who we are. And they may have nothing at all to do with what the novel's about, but I need to know those things in order to write real people.
I have so many questions about that. Do you have a character questionnaire that you use? I've seen writers do this.
I have sometimes come up with one for students who ask me that question. There's essentially writing prompts that help students do this kind of thing. I don't have a questionnaire for myself. There are just certain questions I ask myself. I want a mental picture of this character as a child. I want to know what she was like as a teenager. First love is always really instructive. So I find myself writing about those experiences for all my characters, and then sometimes something different will fall out.
Do you ever make these, not outtakes, that's not quite the right word, but do you ever make these pages available for your readers who are really dying to get their hands on them because they miss your characters once the book is over?
No, I haven't, and I doubt I would do that. I don't show raw writing to anybody. Nobody sees my first draft. Maybe once I have a second draft, I might show it to I have one very good reader who was a classmate of mine at Iowa. My agent is a marvelous reader, but they don't even see the first draft. They might see a second draft. So unexpurgated pages are for my eyes only.
It sounds like journaling in some ways, or like writing a communion with those characters, if that's not too
Yeah,
blatant.
very rough. It's not finished prose in any way. It's not meant to be. It's just exploratory. It's me trying to answer some questions for myself.
I love that. I feel as though writing any character, there are real people who are just up there in the ether, and it's our job to pull them down, like through the channel of us and onto the page. Do you feel that way in some way?
I never thought of it in those terms, but I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, okay, then I made sense today, at least once. So I'm taking that as a win. Guys, if you haven't read Rabbit Moon yet, you will love getting to know these characters. You will love getting to know Aaron and Claire and Lindsay and Grace and Johnny Dew. So please pick up Rabbit Moon. Several copies. Mother's Day is coming. And Jen, thank you so much for being with us on The Blaze. We are so grateful to you giving us all of your time on a Friday. Everybody have a great weekend. Go forth and read. And we will see you next time on Blaze.